The moment I saw Eleanor's satisfied grin through our kitchen window as she watched Jake load his suitcase into his pickup truck, I knew she had finally won. 23 years of marriage, and it took her less than 6 months to convince my own husband that I was the problem in our relationship. And the worst part? She did it by playing the victim, with tears streaming down her exhausted face, telling him how badly I had treated her since she moved to Fairbanks. My name is Marie, and I never thought I would be writing this story. But here I am, alone in our cabin on the outskirts of town, trying to understand how everything fell apart so quickly. Jake and I met when we were 22, working seasonal jobs in Denali National Park. He was tough, kind, and able to make me laugh even on the coldest, darkest days. We built a life in this small Alaskan town, weathered harsh winters, and celebrated short, beautiful summers together. When Eleanor moved in with us last spring after hip surgery, I sincerely wanted to help her. She was 71 years old, stubborn as a mule, but she was Jake's mother. I rearranged all the furniture on the first floor, moved my art studio to the basement, and spent several weeks preparing a guest room to accommodate her walker and medical equipment. I learned physical therapy exercises, stocked up on her favorite foods, and even learned how to make her mother's old recipe for salmon patties. The manipulation began subtly. Eleanor waited until Jake left for work at the hardware store, then cornered me with innocent questions that sounded like accusations. Marie, dear, don't you think Jake looks tired lately? He works so hard, and I'm afraid he's not eating well. When I explained that I made him lunch every morning and we had dinner together in the evening, she nodded with a patronizing smile and said, I'm sure you're doing everything you can." She had a way of turning any conversation into a discussion of my shortcomings as a wife. When Jake mentioned that he missed fishing with his old friend Tom, Eleanor would sigh deeply and say, "Well, Marie, I'm sure she needs him too much around the house to let him pursue his hobby." When our neighbor Sarah stopped by to chat, Eleanor would interrupt her with stories about how stressed I looked lately, how worried she was that I was taking on too much. Every comment was delivered with such obvious concern that it was impossible to respond without sounding paranoid or cruel. The real damage was done during family dinners. Eleanor reminisced about Jake's childhood, portraying herself as a devoted single mother who sacrificed everything for her son. She spoke with enthusiastic admiration about his former school friend, Emma. Emma was such a lovely girl. She always helped out in the kitchen and understood Jake's need for independence. Then she would look at me with her calculating blue eyes and add, "Not everyone understands a man's need for personal space, you know." Jake began to change. He would come home from work quiet and distant, looking at his phone instead of talking to me about his day. When I tried to plan weekends for us, he suggested inviting his mother over or said he was too tired. During our weekly trips to the store, he would suddenly remember things that Eleanor said she needed, turning our time together into errands for her. The turning point came 3 weeks ago, during our anniversary dinner. I made a reservation at the best restaurant in Fairbanks, hoping to reconnect without Eleanor's constant presence. But Jake insisted that we couldn't leave her alone for the whole evening. When I suggested asking a neighbor to check on her, he accused me of being selfish and inconsiderate. "She's an old woman recovering from surgery, Marie. Why can't you show a little compassion?" That night, when I went to bed, I could hear them talking in the kitchen. Eleanor was crying quietly, telling Jake how she was trying not to bother us, how she felt guilty for being a burden. "I know Marie doesn't want me to live here," she whispered. "I can see it in her eyes. Maybe I should look into that nursing home in Anchorage." Jake spoke gently but firmly, assuring her that she could stay in our house for as long as she needed to. The next morning, Jake barely spoke to me. When I tried to explain my point of view, he cut me off. "Mom told me what you say to her when I'm not around. I never thought you could be so cruel to an elderly woman who just wants to feel loved by her family." I was stunned. What was he talking about? I had been nothing but accommodating, even when she criticized my cooking, rearranged the furniture, or monopolized every conversation. But Eleanor had spun a story in which every limitation I had imposed was cruelty. Every moment of frustration was proof of my heartlessness. She turned my reasonable expectations into unreasonable demands, my attempts to be independent into selfishness. The final manipulative move was genius in its simplicity. Eleanor overheard me talking to my sister on the phone and complaining about our living conditions. I said that I felt like a stranger in my own home and that I missed having time alone with my husband. Nothing terrible, right? But when Eleanor repeated this to Jake, she made it sound like I had called her a burden and complained about having to take care of the family. She even managed to cry when she told him about it, and her voice broke when she said she had never felt so unwanted anywhere. Then Jake packed his things. He moved in with his friend Tom in the city center, saying he needed time to think about our marriage. Eleanor, of course, offered to leave too, insisting that she didn't want to be the cause of our problems. But Jake wouldn't hear of it. "Stay, Mom. Marie will figure out what kind of person she wants to be." And here I am, sharing my home with a woman who systematically destroyed my marriage while portraying herself as the innocent victim. She still makes those little comments, still sighs dramatically when I walk across the room, still manages to express her disappointment in my existence without saying anything overtly cruel. The most outrageous thing is that she seems to genuinely believe her own version of the story. In her mind, she is a loving mother-in-law who tried so hard to fit into the family, but was met with nothing but coldness and hostility from her ungrateful daughter-in-law. I've tried to explain the situation to my friends, but it sounds crazy when I say it out loud. How do you prove that someone destroyed your marriage with perfectly timed sighs, carefully worded remarks, and strategic tears? How do you fight an enemy who never throws direct punches, but leaves you bleeding from 1,000 small cuts? Next week, Jake and I are supposed to start marriage counseling. I'm hopeful, but very scared. How do you rebuild trust when its foundations have been undermined by someone who is still present in your daily life? How do you prove manipulation when the manipulator has convinced everyone, including yourself, that they were only trying to help? I know that Eleanor will never take responsibility for what she did. In her version of events, she is a victim of circumstance, an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire of an already troubled marriage. She will never admit how carefully she sowed the seeds of doubt, watered them with false concern, and reaped the fruits of my relationship's destruction. But I'm not giving up. 23 years of love don't disappear overnight, even when they're under attack. Right now, I'm documenting everything, preparing for counseling, and most importantly, learning to trust my own perception of reality again. Eleanor may have won this battle, but the war for my marriage isn't over yet. Share your thoughts on this story. Have you faced similar situations with toxic family members? How did you deal with manipulation disguised as care? Subscribe and write your opinion in the comments below. Also, let me know which city you are reading this story from. I'm very interested to find out where my readers are located around the world.